Hey guys, welcome to Watercolors with Maddie. We're going to paint some really pretty mountainscapes today. For this project, you're going to need some watercolor paper or cardstock. You're going to need a brush or brushes. I'm a little extra, as you guys know. Some watercolors. I'm just going to be using a basic Crayola school set, so I can show you guys how it's done with just that. If you do have the fancier, more elaborate other ones, you can feel free to use those. If you have a palette you would like to use, you can use that, but the lid on this also works as a palette. So just make sure it's clean and ready to go. You're going to need 2 water containers. One is for cleaning the brush, one is for getting the watercolors wet. I would recommend having some paper towels handy because I know I get messy. And then if you want to do a smaller size than this, something to cut the paper with, if you want, you can use a pencil to sketch out where you're doing your lines, but I like to freehand it. And the other thing that you will need is going to be some tape. You're going to want some masking or washi tape, something that's going to be easy to peel up. And you're going to want a surface that's okay if it gets a little wet. I'm actually using the top of a Rubbermaid tote right now because it's going to be the easiest surface for me to clean up when I'm done. I don't have to worry about if I spill any water or paints on it. It's easy to wipe up and clean. You can put something down on a tabletop to use. If you have a placemat, those work great as well. But just make sure that you're doing it on a surface that's okay if it gets water and paint on it, because it will likely happen. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get your watercolor paper, and I've actually cut mine down in half of a full sheet because I'm going to do some smaller ones, so I can actually make 2 out of this. And then what we're going to do is tape it down to our surface. Now I've actually already got one ready here. We're just going to tape it down like so on all 4 sides. This is going to give you a nice crisp border. If you're wanting to put this in a frame and you know the size of frame, you can always cut your paper to that. I always leave anywhere from a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch border. So with this, where the tape is, when I'm done, I can trim that off and it'll be a 5x7 exactly, or I can leave it. But you can do it however you want for whatever size, or just do it on the whole sheet. This tape is also going to help hold your painting flat, which is going to give you a better overall effect. So I'm actually going to do 2 with you guys today. So we're going to do 2 different color schemes. So we're just going to, now you can do it more precise. I may have cheated and measured on this one because that's just how I am. But you can also just wing it. And tape that side. Okay, so we've got those there. Now, we're ready to start. So this is my wet water. This is my cleaning one. Make sure you don't forget which is which, because that'll mess things up a bit. And here we go. So first you're going to choose your colors. For this first one, I'm going to be doing a blue. You know, make sure that your palette is clean. Even if the paint is dry, once you get it wet, it will have all those residues. You want to make sure it's clean. And then you're going to want to mix your paints. So you're going to need some clean water, and you're going to put it in there. Every time you go back to that clean water, make sure you rinse your brush. So you'll see me occasionally just dripping some water in there because it makes it a little bit easier. So we're gonna fill that up with some blue. We're gonna clean our brush and go back and get some black, because we're gonna try and mute this and make it a bit of a gray blue, not so bright. Let's see. So once we get those in there, we're gonna mix them together. Move this over. So for our first color, you're going to want to add some water. Water is going to work kind of like a white paint would when you're working with other paints. You can even do swatches. As you see there, I made one, or you can use the scratch paper to kind of test your colors before you put it on your painting. So you're going to paint the top half of your paper with your first color, and you want it to be kind of muted. You don't want it to be too dark. So if it's too dark, just go in with more water and it sort of wash it out a bit. If you get any hairs from your brush on it, just take them off and fill it back in. And then you're going to go in and do some shading, add some clouds. You can do that with the darker shades. You can do that with just some water, as you'll see me do here in a second. And you can just kind of blend it in. It gives you some more depth and stuff to it. So there's no wrong way to do this, whatever you feel like doing. I'm not sure I said this or not, but this is one of my favorite techniques to do, because it makes it look like you're a much better painter than you may actually be. This is actually a wet on dry technique. So the paper is dry and we're using wet paints. So it makes it a little easier to control the flow of the paints. If you had wet paper and put the wet paint on it, then it would bleed. So that's why between each step we're going to have to make sure that we let our previous layer dry completely. As you'll see later on the purple side, which is the one I'm starting on now, I did not let that happen at one point, so I had to let it dry again and start it over. So the one thing is that watercolors can be pretty forgiving. You can just kind of use a bit more water and you can wash it out more or less. So you can do any color you want. I'm just doing blue and purple, but even if you wanted to do a black and white, you could do that. You just would add a lot of water to your first layer and then use no water or less water near the end. So pretty much any color. As you can see, because the paper's so wet, the clouds started getting a little stringy, hairy look, so I touched them up a bit by just blending that color back in. Super easy to do with a damp brush. So you can let this air dry, go off and do other things, make more. You could have a whole line of them going if you wanted. Or if you have a hair dryer, you can use a hair dryer on a low setting. Don't hold it too close, because if you have too much water, it'll spread it. Sometimes I find that I'm too impatient to wait, which is what happens later on. You'll see. So yeah, so you want to make sure, and the paper will feel completely dry to the touch when it's ready. You won't see any little puddles. So as you can see, we've gone in with our next layer here. I just add a little bit more color to my palette. I add a little bit more blue, a little bit more gray to kind of get the layers you want, or the color you want. Do it on your little test piece. You're going to see me starting on the purple one now. Just kind of shape the top of your mountains however you want. Do some highs and lows. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's just mountains in the background, so the lines don't even have to be perfect. But you're going to want to put more paint towards that edge, because it's going to give it sort of a more defined shaded look. But you're going to paint it down to about the halfway point on this first one, maybe a little bit lower, about to the line where you did your previous layer. If you want to do some shading, you can kind of choose a side to add a little bit more shading to it, to sort of define your mountains a bit more. But because it is wet on wet, it's going to bleed a bit, so it's only going to do a little bit of good on this stage. So then once this dries, we're going to come in and we're going to do another layer. You can kind of start it wherever you want. As you can see, I've actually done some here already. And just gradually make your paints darker as you go by adding more black, but still adding some color and just kind of getting it to where you want it. You're doing kind of an ombre effect. You're gradually just getting it darker and darker, and just add water as you need it, and just kind of make sure that you're blending it down a little bit further each time. You can see on the purple side, you can kind of see the lines there, which is fine that you'll have those because eventually we will cover those up with a darker shade anyways. And as you can see, I've kind of got some splatters. Those are actually really easy to clean up with just a towel, as I'm doing here. Just dab them up gently. So here we are, and as you can see, I'm mixing up some more, and I'm mixing this one a lot darker, but I still want to keep that blue shade to it, so I'd make sure I added more blue to it as well. And then we're just going to come in and we're going to do our last little mountains up the top. And as you can see, I'm just adding black to the color that's already on the page rather than mixing more because the paper is already wet enough. And I just want it to be a bit darker. And then here you can see I'm actually adding some trees. This is optional, you don't have to do this, but I like how it looks with some trees on there. You don't want to fill the whole thing with trees, but kind of keep them towards the side, so the mountains are still your focal point. And I'm adding a little bit down here, but as you can see, it's not really stained because it's so wet still. Now you don't have to wait for it to fully dry to add some of those trees on that layer, but it does help. And you can do as many layers as you want. Usually 3 or 4 is pretty good. As you can see here, I'm going in with a smaller brush and actually adding some little trees in the far off distance on the top of that one. Then I'm going in. I did let this dry a lot longer than it looked, I promise. And I'm going in with a small brush and actually just using some of the wet paint that's already on the paper to go back in and make the little ridge lines for the trees and to define my shapes. As you can see here, I let it dry but not entirely to go back in for some of these trees. And I'm using more of a dry paint. It's still a little wet because it has to be a little wet since it's a watercolor, but I'm not adding too much water to it. I'm mostly just getting it a little damp, just enough to pick up enough paint to do these trees towards the front. And I'm actually just using a pretty much straight up black, but I'm using that blue-black water as my water for it. If you do this, make sure you go back in and you clean your watercolors with a towel later, so then that way it doesn't leave the color there. If it does dry, just use a damp towel. And I'm doing the same thing over on this side with the purple and the black. I am using more of the purple to it, but I'm picking up some purple and some black paint to do the trees on this side. So you can kind of see the two different techniques of where I did the trees along the line on the one side, and on the other I didn't do that, so you can do it either way. So just continue filling it in with these happy little trees. And if you want, you can let it dry and you can come back and do a little bit more, and do as many layers as you want. You could do an entire forest. So as you can see, I accidentally got a bit of a splodge there. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I'm just covering it with a tree because there's no mistakes, only happy accidents. Okay, and now that they're done, once they're dry, it is safe to remove your masking tape. You're just going to gently peel it off from the edges. If it takes a little bit of paper with it, it's okay. Sometimes it kind of adds to the rustic effect. And there you go, finished product. only thing left now is to sign your paper, date it, and hang it up or gift it to a loved one. All right, and there you go. So I hope you guys had a good time here painting these mountains in watercolors with me, and I hope you guys had a great time at camp this week. Hope to see you guys in person sometime soon. Love you guys. Bye.